Hellbound is a sensational Korean manhwa that you have to check out if you're a fan of horror or the thriller genre. At the time of recording, I have read the prologue and the first 15 chapters, which is almost half of what is currently available of Hellbound. I haven't watched the Netflix series, but we'll get to something really interesting about that in a second. If you have watched the Netflix series, please let me know what it's like. I haven't checked it out yet. But I have to talk about Hellbound. It's so cool. Hellbound was written and created by Yon Sang-ho. What's cool about this is that Yon Sang-ho is a director. He created Train to Busan. If you haven't seen Train to Busan, it is one of the best zombie films ever made. It rocked the world about 6 or 7 years ago, and I absolutely adore it. It turned me into a huge fan of Gong Yoo, who is one of Korea's biggest and brightest and best film stars. It's an atmospheric, campy, schlocky, action-packed, beautifully directed, beautifully choreographed, gorgeous pieces of zombie cinema. There is so much that I could say about Train to Busan. It is a wonderful piece of horror cinema. Action horror cinema. It's brutal, it's gorgeous, it's campy, it's schlocky, it's fun. But here, Yon Sang-ho has turned his attention to a comic book, a manhwa, and he has teamed up with Choi Gyu-sok to do the artwork for it. And it's free to read right now on Webtoon, or you can buy a physical copy as well. I've seen it around in bookshops. As I said, I was going to mention why the Netflix series is so interesting, and it's because Yon Sang-ho, the writer of the manhwa, has also directed the series. So this is very similar to the situation with Katsuhiro Otomo, who wrote and drew the Akira manga and then went on to direct the Akira film. That is one of the coolest facts about manga and anime. It is an amazing thing to think about how Otomo created both the manga and the anime Akira, one of the greatest genre-defining things that has ever existed in modern fiction. And the same has pretty much happened here with Hellbound. As for what Hellbound is actually about, it blends the horror and thriller genres brilliantly. You've got hellish, supernatural, brutalist, disgusting imagery and events, mixed with detective, pseudo-noir thriller fiction, and cults. 2 different cults that are interconnected. Now, as I said, at the time of recording, I've read the first 15 chapters, so I don't know how the story ends. I think it's still ongoing, but I have to talk about it now. In the prologue, we begin with 2 things going on at once. Visually, we can see a man in a cafe. He looks nervous, and he's taking a coffee over to his table, and he can hear a group of teenagers watching a video on their phone and laughing and discussing what they're seeing. And what we hear, what we see in the speech bubbles, is what they're seeing on their phone, which is a discussion with a cult leader and a news report about this strange phenomena that seems to be going on across the entire world. And this phenomenon is that people are being sent a message that they are going to die and be taken to hell. They are given the time when this will happen, and that's it. And the report mentions that this time could be anywhere between a few hours from now and 20 years from now. And the nervous man who's taking coffee over to his table is listening to this, and then he looks at the clock, he checks an alarm on his phone, and we realize very quickly that he has been given one of these messages, and now is the time for him to be taken to hell. The teenagers are arguing whether or not this is special effects and a scam and all make-believe urban legend, when suddenly the entire outside wall of the cafe bursts open and a bunch of hellish demons come in to claim this nervous man. He escapes, he runs down the street, these 3 or 4 hellish demon ghostly black apparitions chase him. They're crushing cars and pushing things out the way, and they pin him down, and they tear him apart, and they burn him to a crisp, and off he goes to hell. That's how we begin. The cult of this story is fascinating, because it's kind of separated into 2 halves. You've got this New Truth Society, or NTS, which is led by this guy who was an orphan, and after he left his orphanage, he went into a field and he saw a man be taken to hell by these demon things. And now he's slowly built up this cult over the last few years, less than a decade, and his belief, the message that he's spreading to all of his followers and believers, is that these things are taking people to hell who have done something wrong. Sinners. people who have committed terrible crimes, things like murder and abuse. These people are being taken to hell as punishment by God. That's what he believes, that's the message that he's spreading. And at first, he seems like a really decent guy. It's not a cult in his eyes. He is simply a person who is observing and spreading the truth. And to be fair, that is what's happening as far as we can tell. All of the people that are being given this message and then claimed by hell have all done terrible things. Each of them has committed an awful crime. When a person is taken to hell, it is often then discovered that there are bodies under their floorboards or in their garden. They have done something awful. And now, because of the word being spread by this cult, police detectives are being asked by the public to investigate the histories of these people who are being taken, because there must be something about them that's worth unearthing. Literally. But the other half of this cult is something called Arrowhead, which is a group of people who are doxing people. Anyone who they get wind of as being targeted by these demons being sent this message are then doxed, and their information, their family information, their history, their children, everything about them becomes public knowledge. And they are then in danger, not just from hell itself, but from this Arrowhead cult who are kind of following in the footsteps of the New Truth Society. Our protagonist is a detective, a man called Jin. He has a son. And in the prologue, you find out that his son has been wrangled into this New Truth Society and is getting very, very close to the leader of this group. Cult? Yeah, cult. The detective also has a very sad backstory. His wife was killed while she was trying to deliver him some fresh socks and underwear while he was working a case for several days. What makes it even sadder is that we find out very early on the only reason she delivered all this stuff to him is because their kid was supposed to do it on his way home from school and just forgot. So now the kid kind of has that on his conscience as well. He failed to do a thing, his mum then had to do, and it got her killed. She was murdered by someone who ended up getting only a few years in prison on an insanity plea and is now about to be set free. This gives both Detective Jin and his son just the right amount of motivation to be committed to what's going on here, but in very different ways, because you've got an angry teenage boy and a more mature middle-aged man, both of whom are struggling, both of whom are still mourning and angry and twisted and bitter, but have digested and come to terms with this, or not, in very different ways. There are a lot of twists and turns here, and what I really appreciate is the fact that the story grows very gradually. The cast of characters gets bigger and bigger. There are quite a few characters that I've now met that I haven't mentioned here, because it grows and grows and I want you to enjoy that. But Hellbound is a fantastically well-realized piece of fiction. It explores sin and punishment. It considers secrecy. Secrets kept from our loved ones, from ourselves. A lot of denial about what we do wrong and how we perceive ourselves publicly. It discusses revenge. It looks at how we are twisted by our guilt and by the things that we regret and by our losses. It also looks at cults, which are a real huge issue in today's society, in Korea and in many, many corners of the globe. It also looks at what a cult is exactly. It considers the concept of cultism and a cult of personality, and the idea that a cult is a specific small religious group. But a cult is also a group that simply surrounds an individual, a speaker, a public presence, someone whose word people hang off. And it really gets you thinking about things like incel culture and these dangerous white men that incels obsess over. What is this but a cult of personality? And we see that in Hellbound, as well as seeing demons appearing out of nowhere, tearing people apart, burning them and dragging them to hell. There are wonderful horror elements to the visuals here and to the direction. There's cinematography in this. Remember, it is a comic book, and so there are camera angles to consider. There is lighting, there is texture. It's all in black and grey, so there's no colour, but there is a noir, claustrophobic aspect to it. And the artist has done such a wonderful, wonderful job of considering angles, claustrophobia, zooms in and out, wide shots, intense close-ups. There is so much choreography and cinematography in this series of still images. It's one of the things that I love about comic books, manga, manhwa. These things really consider cinematography and visual landscapes as a means of storytelling, and Hellbound really excels at that. The demon monster things don't look that interesting themselves. They are just generic, twisty shadow monsters. But aside from them, it's the scenes, the action scenes, the moment-to-moment beats of the story that really hold your attention and make you feel true dread. It's a truly fantastic thriller/horror story. You've got the noir detective angle, you've got the cult, and you've got terrifying, demonic, supernatural events going on. I cannot sell Hellbound enough. It is a fantastic read. It is a wonderful manhwa. It is essential reading if you're a comic book fan, a horror fan, a thriller fan, a fan of Korean literature, and Korean cinema. Because remember, the writer directed one of the best zombie films, one of the best Korean horror action films ever made. Check it out and subscribe for books.